Okay, welcome everyone. I am Melissa Stewart, Member Relations Specialist for HathiTrust, and I am thrilled to be here today with Natalie Fulkerson, HathiTrust Collection Services Librarian, and Rachel Abellera, Member Research Assistant, to talk to you about their research exploring contributor experiences with local ingest. This session is being recorded. We are in Zoom webinar. So if you want to ask a question or type something in the chat, feel free to do that. We will be taking questions at the end. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Give us your name, your library, and a favorite title from your collection that you've come across in your work. We love hearing all of the things that people are discovering in HathiTrust. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's a rundown for today. Again, save discussion for chat, questions in the Q&A feature. This presentation will take about 25 minutes, and then the remaining time will be for discussion. The recording and slides will be shared with you afterward, and the closed captioning has been enabled. So you can just go to that captions button and you will be able to see that. All right. Next slide. I think right now I am going to turn it over to Natalie Fulkerson.
Hi, everybody. Melissa, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Natalie Fulkerson, Collection Services Librarian at HathiTrust. And along with my colleague, Rachel Abellera, we're here to talk about ingest, which is the process that brings digitized content into the HathiTrust collection for preservation and access. HathiTrust staff typically refer to that process as ingest, but you might think of it as something more like content deposit or submission, contribution. They all refer to the same process. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll go over some background about our collection and our contributing member libraries. Then Rachel will talk about a recent research study that we did to understand members' experience with one specific aspect of that ingest process. I'll come back in at the end to describe some possible next steps, and we should have plenty of time for Q&A. One last note, we will touch on some possible next steps and ways that you can get involved in this presentation, but we're not announcing specific solutions or timelines today. So stay tuned for more information as we continue work on the project. All right, so some of this information is familiar probably to many of you, but I'll summarize briefly. We have just shy of 19 million items in the HathiTrust collection, mostly books and serials digitized from members' physical print collections. There are several ways to contribute materials to the library. 95% of our collection comes to us via the Google Library Partners program, with the balance split between an Internet Archive workflow and what we refer to as our local workflow, where member libraries digitize their collections themselves, either in-house or using a vendor, and then submit the digital files to us directly. About 40% of the collection is in full view, and about 60% is in limited view. So you don't have to be a Google partner doing a large-scale digitization effort or working with the Internet Archive to contribute materials to the collection. Many members are scanning and contributing items to HathiTrust directly using the local workflow, and that's going to be the focus of our presentation today. So some quick information about who our contributing libraries are. We have over 200 members in HathiTrust. 65 of those members have submitted at least one item to HathiTrust, most from the US and Canada, but with important contributions also from member libraries in places like Australia, Japan, and Spain. Of those 65 contributors, 43 are using the local ingest pathway, either alone or in combination with those other pathways, Google and Internet Archive, to get their materials into the collection. So you can see that the local workflow comprises only about 2% of the collection overall, but many members have used it or are using it to get their materials into HathiTrust. Okay, fun with charts and graphs. If we focus just on the local workflow, this chart shows the number of directly submitted items that we have in our collection, broken out by member contributor since 2007, when the first locally digitized volumes were submitted by the University of Michigan. So you can see that quantities vary dramatically by member, with a few members contributing large numbers of items and many more libraries contributing smaller quantities of material. If we rearrange that same information and look at the same number of volumes arranged by year they were contributed to HathiTrust, and here the individual colors in this graph represent individual member libraries, you can see that the quantity contributed to the library fluctuates over time, and so does the number of members who are contributing in this way in any given year. Some members will start contributing for the first time, others are discontinuing, but overall, the chart becomes more colorful as you move from left to right, which shows that the total number of local contributors has grown and is continuing to grow. And more members contributing in this way means that more diverse materials are coming into the collection. Okay, time for a poll. So continuing on the theme of HathiTrust members and contributors to the collection, we'd like to learn a little bit about who's in our audience today and what might be motivating you to attend today's webinar. So if you're not a member or none of these apply to you, that's totally okay. Let us know why you're here in the chat. And if you are a member, if you could let us know which of these scenarios apply to you, we'll keep the poll open for a couple of minutes and then we'll take a look at the results. Melissa, maybe you could let us know when the response rate slows down so we can see what people have said.
All right, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results.
Okay, cool. So it looks like we have a lot of folks attending today from a library that's already contributing items to the collection in this way, and some who want to be contributing materials to the collection. This is also really interesting that we've got some folks on the call today who have tried to engage in this process with us in the past and might like to try it again. So we're glad you're here. We're going to talk about efforts that we've been making to understand how members are experiencing that process and improve it. And so we're excited to share our research with you. All right, I am going to keep us moving. So we've talked about the collection, we've talked about contributors, and if we bring those two things together, you might ask the question, why is it that we think supporting members and contributing their locally digitized items to HathiTrust is important? I won't read out this whole slide, but the main thing to know is that our recent strategic vision calls for us to recommit to stewarding our digital collection and growing it in intentional ways, in part by streamlining what's referred to here as the collections ingest deposit process. We've found through experience that members who work with large-scale digitization programs like Google are often scanning what's in their general collections, their circulating collections, and members who are scanning in-house are often digitizing their special collections, so rare or unique materials, items that are in maybe brittle condition and can't go through a high volume scanning workflow, or items that have particular local significance. Bringing all of those materials into the collection helps us serve users better by providing access to more knowledge, and supports members better as well by ensuring preservation of those materials for future generations to access. So we want the local ingest workflow to work well, and we want it to serve as many of our members who want to make use of it. So with our strategic vision now to guide us, we know that we need to better understand how members are experiencing the process, this local pathway for contributing items to HathiTrust. Fortunately, we're not starting from scratch in undertaking this work. We've been reviewing prior work conducted by the HathiTrust Collections Committee and later the Digital Collection Strategy Working Group. Shout out to those of you who have taken part in these activities. And in my own experience working with members on setting up the ingest process, it's been pretty clear that members wanted an improved process. So we need to know more about specific pain points and potential improvements, which might sound to you a lot like doing user research, or in this case, member research. But Natalie doesn't know how to do this type of research. So after some panicking, we were able to hire someone who does. And that someone is Rachel. Rachel Abellera is a recent graduate of the University of Michigan with a Master's of Science in Information, specializing in user experience research and design. Rachel joined HathiTrust as a member research assistant in February 2025. We've been thrilled to work with her this year, and I'll turn things over to her now to describe her research and findings. So take it away, Rachel.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalie. So first, for some context before I go into the research goals and methods, this research project was focused on assessing the user experience of HathiTrust members who contributed using local ingest, as Natalie mentioned. And during this project, we specifically focused on three different user groups. So those who currently contribute, those who previously contributed, and those who inquired about contributing but never formally completed the process. And by looking across these three groups, we really hope to capture a wide range of perspectives and experiences to better understand the full contribution journey. And these are a few of the research goals I came up with and amended throughout the research project. So this first one was about observing and documenting contributor workflows. The second and third research goals looked at pain points and an understanding of the requirements. And lastly, I wanted to know sentiment and motivations behind the experience of contributing materials. And now for a quick overview of the timeline for the research project. I started with research planning and understanding the local ingest process and requirements myself. Next, I began interviewing the first user group, so current contributors through field research in order to discover what their workflows were like. Then I moved to exploratory interviews with previous contributors to understand pain points and a survey with contributors who inquired about the process to discover barriers to starting. And then lastly, I did data analysis and synthesis and used the findings to create some strategic recommendations, which I'll go into at the end. And these are some of the methods I use. So primarily interviews and surveys. Across all three user groups, I conducted 18 total interviews and I had Natalie as note taker for about half of them. The makeup of the 18 interviews consisted of 9 who were current contributors, 7 who were previous contributors, and 2 who were potential contributors that inquired about the process. And interviewees had a variety of roles and departments such as digital collections, digital preservationists, digital imaging specialists, and digital architects. I also conducted a survey in order to reach member institutions who inquired about the process but never formally started. However, I wanted to note there was a low response rate, which is a limitation that I will discuss later. And now on to some of the findings. So the first finding I wanted to highlight was something that was very consistent and positive across interviews and surveys. Digital preservation was mentioned the most frequently as an institutional motivation to contribute. Beyond preservation, many participants also found the process very rewarding and noted that they were very eager to contribute. This graph above shows respondents from the survey who listed some of their top motivations to start as expanding access to collections, alignment with institutional goals, and long-term preservation of materials. It also shows an interesting pattern I saw, which was that all respondents who did list alignment with institutional goals as a motivation to start ended up attempting to formally contribute. So while we can't draw causal conclusions from this, it does suggest that alignment with institutional goals may be a key correlator with commitment to contribute. So this participant here explained that they were personally interested in the HathiTrust mission of preservation and felt that there was a lot of institutional alignment with the HathiTrust mission. This emphasis on digital preservation and access and aligning with institutional goals was something I saw across all user groups in interviews and surveys. And now for some of the challenges. So for some context, I decided to segment challenges across types of contributors to understand pain points which were unique to different groups. So this graph above shows challenges faced by those who currently contribute and previously contributed. Across these user groups, staffing time or competing priorities and unclear complex requirements were mentioned as the biggest challenges with the contribution process. These issues were consistent across interviews and survey responses and frequently came up as the reasons institutions slowed down with contributing. In addition, lack of alignment with contributors' own workflow, as well as a lack of expertise with the process, were frequent challenges that were mentioned. This was because often only one or two individuals at an institution understood the full contribution process, making the workflow fragile and fairly dependent on a few key staff. This graph above shows challenges that prevented interested institutions from completing the contribution process. These responses were gathered from the survey that was sent out to institutions who inquired about the contribution process but never formally started. So, in addition to staffing time and unclear or complex requirements, some additional challenges that were mentioned both in the survey and interviews was difficulty finding appropriate software and external tools. Some participants specifically mentioned that there was difficulty identifying what tools were required or recommended by HathiTrust in order to complete the contribution process. I also segmented challenges across smaller and bigger institutions, and it did appear that smaller institutions desired more one-on-one support due to a lack of resources, while larger institutions desired an integrated tool that could be used by one person rather than a complex workflow with many moving parts across different departments. This first interviewee from a smaller institution stated, "We don't have the infrastructure. The biggest hurdle for us is that you have to be in that large scale digitization model to contribute." So this institution and a few others felt that HathiTrust requirements were slightly hard to meet without access to matched digitization projects like Google Books or more staffing and resources. So now on to some of the technical challenges that were mentioned. For current contributors, some additional challenges were meeting HathiTrust requirements and workflow misalignment. During interviews, participants stated HathiTrust requirements were so complex and often more technical than local workflow, so they had to develop unique solutions to deposit materials in both their own repositories and HathiTrust. So this participant here emphasized this point as I mentioned, they were faced with the task of how to make it the most efficient way to get materials into both their local repository and HathiTrust. In the end, a colleague created a script, but those are very idiosyncratic to their own local workflows. So although current contributors found solutions, this required a lot of trial and error and a lot of workarounds, which significantly slowed down contributions and made the process feel hard to maintain over time. So this was another commonly mentioned technical challenge, which was the need for validation. Many interviewees discussed wanting a staging area or environment to validate their packages and metadata in order to reduce back and forths with single page fixes or small errors such as incorrect file naming conventions. So they emphasized that this kind of feedback mechanism, especially one with clear and actionable error messages, would allow them to catch those small mistakes early on and reduce the overall time and effort it takes to finalize a contribution. And for the other two user groups, those who previously contributed and stopped, or those who inquired about contributing but never formally contributed, faced slightly different barriers that were earlier on in the contribution process. So the first barrier I saw was deciphering and digesting the documentation. Many institutions stated that the layout of documentation made it hard to digest. One participant specifically stated that the documentation was difficult and not straightforward. And later on, they went to discuss how they would have appreciated a high-level overview of this documentation, especially since they didn't have a technical background. And tool identification was another frequently mentioned challenge that I touched on earlier. Many institutions didn't know what tools they needed or what tools would be best in meeting the HathiTrust requirements. So they really wanted more clarity up front, ideally a list of vetted tools with explanations of when and how to use them. And then finally, the last main barrier was that these groups faced were identifying what materials to contribute and who to contact when they faced issues. So a lot of institutions felt that there was a lack of guidance with these two main steps in the initial process of attempting to contribute. One participant stated that going through and deciding what titles they have that HathiTrust doesn't have was very labor intensive. However, it's important to note that HathiTrust does not require members to only submit materials that are not in the HathiTrust repository. So this suggests the need for more guidance and clarity of what is required of contributors before they start the process. And now on to some of my recommendations. So my first recommendation was to provide additional onboarding documentation and support. Institutions felt overwhelmed by complex requirements and a lack of direct support. So creating a high-level organized guide for the contribution process and or a starter toolkit with demos and information of who to directly contact could help contributors feel more supported and prepared from the start. Oh, and I think I might have skipped one. Okay, yes, great. The next recommendation was to provide a community-based support or peer network. So many institutions really desired the ability to reach out to peers to ask about tools they've used, demos, or about common issues they faced. However, some interviewees mentioned that they reached out and did not hear back, while others were very eager to help and give demos. So this highlights a clear area of need that HathiTrust could help with by facilitating these connections. One way this could be done is by creating a peer network or buddy system. For example, a Google form could be sent out to pair institutions together or add them to a contributor Slack space, depending on their preferences. And then my third recommendation was to consider building a GUI or validator tool. Many institutions struggled with misaligned workflows and stated their desire for a tool built by HathiTrust to streamline their workflow or reduce the technical barriers to contribute for less technical staff. So multiple institutions mentioned that there was difficulty maintaining workflows for contributing to HathiTrust due to staffing turnover. The staff that built these custom scripts or in-house tools would leave, and that made it really hard to maintain or update these tools over time due to their complexity. So providing a tool that's built and maintained by HathiTrust would make the contribution process more accessible by reducing institutions' reliance on one-off internally developed solutions and enable a broader range of staff, regardless of technical background, to take part in the contribution process. And then this is my last recommendation to provide some tailored support to smaller institutions. So a few of these smaller institutions or teams that I talked to felt discouraged since they weren't able to do mass digitization, but had a few unique materials they wanted to contribute. So HathiTrust could meet them halfway by allowing small scale contributions or providing a full service option that allows institutions to submit images and have HathiTrust handle the technical and logistical aspects of the contribution process, similar to a vendor. However, institutions that did mention using a vendor struggled with finding one who would meet all of HathiTrust specifications. So this really shows that providing a service like this would be a really unique solution that a lot of institutions could potentially be interested in.
Okay, and so now back over to me. I'll just talk a little bit about some next steps and where we might be going from here. So just to briefly re-summarize, here are the four main recommendations again that arose from Rachel's research: creating onboarding support, reassessing and revisiting our requirements, our technical requirements, to determine if any parts of those can be eliminated or clarified or simplified, exploring ways that members can support each other in preparing and submitting items to HathiTrust, and then exploring potential tools or other services that we could create and support that could lower the barrier to contribution for all institutions, regardless of size, collection size, or technical expertise or capacity. So we took Rachel's recommendations, we conducted an internal review, we talked to our technical team in-house, and we've determined based on that, that the first couple of steps we want to take will be to look at onboarding support and at our ingest requirements as areas for possible improvement. So we're just now getting started on that work, and we will share more information as we get further through that process. In a second, I'll also provide some information about how members and contributors can engage in that process. Before that, though, some areas of research that our first phase of work revealed might be important and useful in figuring out how to best meet this need for members. Since interviews primarily focused on library staff who are involved in preparing images and packaging materials together to represent the digital object, we know that it would be important to also consider contributors' experiences in preparing the bibliographic metadata or the catalog records that we also require in order to bring this content into our collection, so that we can better understand the end-to-end process of how contributors experience creating and submitting this material to HathiTrust. Often those two paths are conducted by different staff in a single institution. So we want to understand handoffs, communication challenges, other kinds of technical challenges. The next thing that we want to do is get into more detail and learn more from members about needs regarding specific tools, software, and other supports that would be useful in actually generating parts of the package so that members can create and submit those volumes and have confidence that they meet our technical requirements, because the workflows are set up to give you confidence and have success in that process. And then lastly, as Rachel mentioned earlier, there was a limited response rate from the survey that we sent out to prospective contributors. So hearing more from members who inquired, but were never formally set up to contribute materials to the collection, feels really important to us. First, in either validating or invalidating the survey results that we have, and also in potentially uncovering additional roadblocks and opportunities to provide support. So how can members get involved in the work going forward? Melissa is going to paste a link in the chat to an interest form that we prepared ahead of the presentation. So if you're listening to this webinar and you're interested in learning more or in participating in future work, you can fill out that form and we'll follow up with you directly. So, for example, if you're a current or previous local contributor, we'd really like to hear from you to provide additional input on what that experience has been like for you. If you digitize materials for other repositories, but not for HathiTrust, we'd love you to sign up and tell us about the existing workflows that you have so that we can evaluate how our requirements might be brought more into alignment with those workflows. And then lastly, if you have digitized materials that you know you want to contribute to HathiTrust, you can reach out to our user support email. That address is support@hathitrust.org to learn more about that process and to help us create better onboarding support as we work through that process with you. All of those inquiries are routed to me, so I'll be the person on the other end of the phone, gathering information from you about your plans and working to support you through the process. So we'd love to hear from those folks as well. All right, before we finish off, some thank yous. I have some folks listed here on the screen, some lovely, generous colleagues at HathiTrust. We could not have done this research or put this presentation or done this webinar without the support of folks on the screen here. And lastly, but certainly not least, folks at our member organizations who participated in this first phase of research. If you filled out a survey, if you participated in an interview, we are so grateful. We're not releasing your identities, so I'm not going to thank you individually, but you know who you are. Thank you for coming to hear about the results, and we have lots more work to do. So with that, I will, I think, stop the screen share, and let's see what kind of conversation has been happening in the chat or if there are questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, we don't have any questions yet, but while people are formulating their questions, I'm happy to fill you in on what's been going on in chat. Ange asked a question. I guess I'm curious about whether these findings resonate with you all, if they make sense to you all, or if some things are more important than other things. I have a couple of responses to that. One is definitely resonates with me. We're in the 19% who tried to contribute but never succeeded. And our primary hangup has been a lack of cataloging staff to create MARC records that meet the requirements. We would like to contribute uncatalogued materials from our GovDocs collection. Another response, we would very much like an easier way to contribute and correct bib records. It is a huge technical lift on our end. And another, the GUI tool sounds promising.
Thanks, Melissa. That's pretty consistent with what we heard, I think, in our interviews. It is interesting that those couple of comments, and from what I'm understanding, had to do with the bibliographic or the cataloging part of the workflow, which is a part of the workflow that we haven't studied yet in any detail. And so especially if that's an area of challenge for you, I'll just put in another plug to fill out the form so we can learn more from you about what that's like.
Okay, I have a question now. What is the timeline for implementing any of these adjustments and recommendations?
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. We're just at the beginning of this work. We knew we needed to learn more about what member needs are. And as is often the case with your first phase of research, that reveals a need for a lot more research before you can actually start developing a tool or rolling out a process. So our plan now is to really focus in on a couple of areas of need, learn what we can from members about how we can specifically meet those needs, and then put projects or put proposals forward to HathiTrust leadership so that they can be prioritized so we can get that work done.
Hey, I have a question related to the earlier comment about having a lack of cataloging staff to create MARC records. As a novice in the field, I'd appreciate some clarification based on Julia's comments. The question is if the records have to be MARC. What is the monetary obligation for the institution to contribute?
Okay, I can take that one. I think it was in two parts. So currently our requirement is in MARC. We can accept MARC binary or MARC XML, but we do require that the items that you submit to us for the collection are cataloged and that they have a MARC catalog record. So yes, that's something that we've heard from members anecdotally creates some challenges for them specifically or particularly for items that might be coming out of a digital asset management system that are cataloged in, say, Dublin Core or according to a different schema. Regarding the monetary obligation, there is no cost to contribute items to the collection. Members pay an annual membership fee to support HathiTrust operations that's based on the overlap between what's in your physical collection and what's in the HathiTrust digital collection. So fees are not assessed on the basis of your contribution to the collection. Does that clarify that question?
I have another comment. Yes, that the response was yes, that is. I'm interested in an increased connection with peer institutions contributing locally digitized content. I would say we know that, don't we? We just haven't figured out how to do it yet. What would be the most productive way to do that? We did for a while. I have a Slack, a community Slack that we started during the pandemic, and it didn't get very much use. And so we're trying to figure out what would be a good way to connect contributors with each other. So if you have any ideas, yeah, contact us and let us know what you think. I would love to hear, or if there's a place in the form to add any ideas that you have about that, that would be great to hear how
Yeah,
you'd
I
like.
think what was interesting in the research, and Rachel, you can say more about this if you have more detail at hand. But what was interesting in the research to me is that some members said, yes, we really would like support. And other members said, yes, we really would like to offer support. We have a lot of experience and we would love to share that experience. So I think matching folks up in a way that is useful and productive would be, a big benefit. We certainly have friends at institutions who have expertise in certain kinds of systems or workflows, and so we have kind of an informal way of connecting a person who needs some expertise with a person who has some expertise, and this is not only around ingest, but lots of other parts of our operations. But we do that really informally right now. And so having a better sense of, who's looking for support, who can potentially offer that support, and really make that a self-sustaining kind of process where we don't actually have to intervene in it as staff, and members feel like they're getting the support that they need kind of, without having to wait for us to answer a ticket or something like that, I think would be really useful.
It would be great if HathiTrust could work with regional interest groups to reach a group who already work together. For example, here in Ohio, we have the Ohio Digitization Interest Group that reaches UC, OU, OSU, and more.
I did not know about that group, and I agree. I think that would be a really interesting way to get information, but maybe also to share information. So if the person who contributed that comment might be willing to reach out to me about that, that would be terrific. We have had some conversations, for example, with the BTAA, the Big Ten Academic Alliance. There are a couple of interest groups within that structure that work on digitization and digital library stuff. So we have some connections there. We've had some conversations, but certainly I think there's more we can do.
I am also interested in easier ways to systematically check, like in batch, existing coverage in HT before going through any contribution process. We have local script that does this based on OCLC number, but it would be useful to do this via some admin function, and also if it could connect the related OCLC numbers.
We hear you. Yes. I do want to just reiterate that having items in the collection already is not from our end a blocker to submitting materials. So if you are moving stuff to offsite storage and you just want to digitize everything on that particular shelf without having to worry about whether we have it in the collection already, you don't have to worry about that. Duplication is not considered a problem for us. And so you certainly can submit materials without worrying whether or not we already have them. But if you're trying to focus your energies on things that we don't already have, yes, we certainly hear about that from members.
As someone from a contributing institution via Internet Archive, it is often unclear who to ask for help or how to get help. Any guidance about this?
Yes, email support@HathiTrust.org. Always. That should always be your first step with questions about ingest. Most of those queries will come to me, and from there I can connect you, or I can connect with technical staff at HathiTrust, or with whoever else we might need to talk to figure out, the answer to your question. But submitting your queries directly to that email address lets us track your question through a system so that if, for example, someone's on vacation, you don't have to sit and wait for a response. And that way we're also building our internal institutional memory about the kinds of questions people ask and the kinds of challenges they encounter, which is another kind of point of input for information gathering that we're doing to try to understand members' experience.
Yeah, I would say too that we're small, so that support email that is not going to you're not going to be answered by a bot. This is not some big help center. Our user support team is a small number of librarians and staff at our member libraries who triage those responses and assign the appropriate response to the appropriate HathiTrust staff member. And so you don't have to worry about having to go through some kind of automated system. We will see and read everything that you submit and respond. Okay, any more questions or comments? I'm not seeing any questions. All right, I am going to stop the recording, but we're not going to go away. But for you who are watching the recording, thank you very much for watching. And I'm going to stop the recording, and anybody else can still stay on and ask questions. We'll still hang out for a few more minutes.